Hi, I'm Sonia Jackson, and I'm with Handshake, which is a social impact agency. At Handshake, we believe that lasting influence is directly related to the clear problem that you're trying to solve for your brand. And one of the things that we've decided to do is feature leaders, share space with leaders who are engaging and immersing themselves in real causes at every single level. We have to bring the private and public sector together to work on solving real world problems. And today I have the honor and I am humbled to be sharing space with Megha Desai, who is president of the Desai Foundation. Welcome, Megha. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having us. I have been following the work of Handshake for a really long time, and I'm really honored to be a part of this community and this program.
Excellent. Well, let's jump in. So, with more than 10 years in the private sector, what inspired you to move to leading a global foundation dedicated to the health and livelihood of women and children?
I really enjoyed working in advertising and branded entertainment. I had a very fruitful career. Um, by all of the metrics that one has been trained in the kind of early knots of what success looks like. I was it. I was earning the money and I was earning the accolades and getting promoted and doing those things. Um, I think that after a little over a decade of working on, deodorants and sodas and booze and socks, uh, I just had this moment of, wow, I'm working 90-hour weeks. I am, earning money, but like, is this it? Is this what the rest of my life is going to look like? And I ended up leaving kind of the formal advertising and marketing sector and started my own firm. My own firm I was like, I get to choose the clients that I want to work on. So I'm going to work on clients that I think are doing something a little bit more conscientious. I really wish I could say to this audience here that like, oh yeah, I was out to save the world. And I was, it really kind of all happened like inch by inch. And so, my first big client was a massive Fortune 50 company that really was trying to just shift the way they thought about one thing in terms of impact. I had a bunch of other small startups, a tiny fledgling company called Spotify that was trying to create partnerships with companies that they felt like were doing good things. And so it just kind of grew inch by inch. And one of these clients was at the time a family foundation that my parents had started. And after about 15 years of my parents running this family foundation, they realized that they had built kind of like 15 MVPs, like most viable products, that after spending their like friends and family around, they were kind of ready to expand and open out to the world and scale. But we didn't really have the tools to do that as a family foundation. So we converted to a public foundation. And while we were doing this shift, my family said, listen, you've worked in branding and marketing. Can you help us with this very complicated shift? And so I said, sure, I'll help out with all this. And I just kind of got more and more involved. And how I ended up running the organization is quite by accident. I really didn't think I was qualified to run a nonprofit because I had never done that before. So we looked for almost a year and a half for the right leader. But this was about 9 years ago or 7 years ago when social good wasn't such an attractive field yet. So the people that were in the nonprofit world that had been there for a really long time were the ones that were applying for this role. But this role needed a little bit of risk taking, a little bit of entrepreneurship, a little bit of seeing the world a little differently than, say, a traditional large scale institutional nonprofit. And so I kind of took this job by default. Like we just couldn't find the right fit. And so I said to the board of directors, I'll do this for a year and then we'll find the right person. And after a year, that was 6 years ago. And so, or 5.5 years ago. So I've been leading the organization ever since. And I think the motivation and how it all came together was kind of perfect in that the skills that you require are the same as long as you're willing to fail. And the vision was that vision I had from the beginning, right? Like this, like selling beer, and no disrespect to people that are working on beer brands, right? Like that is not the issue. But if it doesn't fit for you, then there's always going to be that disconnect. And so that was kind of the issue for me. But that's how I ended up running the Desai Foundation.
That's super powerful. And one of the things that you really hit on, or you hit on several of the characteristics that we talk about that embody impact executives, but courage. Most people don't embrace the notion of failing or, failing forward. And in order to move forward, you absolutely have to fail. And so I think that's such a powerful statement that you made there. I want to shift gears a little bit because, we are in the midst of a global pandemic and have been for more than a year. And I'm wondering, I want to talk to you about, how the Desai Foundation continued to be able to work, and observe and your mission in the face of the pandemic. And will you talk about some of the things that you did that, helped you get through where we are today?
The first thing you have to think about is like, what are my responsibilities as a leader, right? And that's kind of where we started. Rather than diving in and saying like, let's fix all these problems, it's kind of like, first, what is my responsibility? My responsibility was to my team globally, whether they were in the US or in India. And so the first thing that we did I think it was about a month in when we realized this was like a bigger deal than what we thought it was, we sent a note out to every single staff member, full-time staff member, and said, you will not be laid off. No matter how long this lasts, you will not be laid off for anything other than performance, right? Obviously, performance-wise, that's a thing, but like nobody's going to be laid off because we're in the middle of a pandemic. And we decided that we'd rather go in the red and pay our team, because at the end of the day, if we're going to be an organization that's cultivating dignity and empowering women, it doesn't seem really all that empowering to let go of all these women that work for us, and men, but just generally, like it didn't feel like that was going to be the right fit. So that was first and foremost. We also worked really hard to keep our teams safe. So we in India mandated vaccines. We did a lot of things that really kind of early on to just say like, this is what is the right thing for us to stay safe. And given that you guys are working in the field, you're in contact with a lot of people, it is critical that you protect yourself and your families. The second thing that you're always thinking is, am I doing enough? And that was always a push and pull that I had was, okay, if we're impacting this many people, is that enough? Can't we do more? Well, the opposite of that is, well, am I doing what I'm good at? And so the Desai Foundation took a really hard look at, okay, everybody's talking about oxygen. Everybody's talking about this. Everybody's talking about that. Well, what are we good at? What do we already do? And what we do is deploy services on the ground to the 1,000 villages that we serve. And so that is what we continued to do. So the services that we were providing were slightly adjusted, right? Now, instead of health camps where we were doing screening, we were helping people get to isolation centers, and we were helping people get to COVID care centers. We were screening people ourselves, saying, hey, let me check your oxygen levels and see if you really need to go to a hospital. We were delivering food and PPE instead of delivering information. So it was kind of like, how do we take what we already know how to do and already have the infrastructure to do and deploy that? Because I think that a lot of the mistakes that I saw other NGOs that are our friends that we work with, they tried to do too much. And like, it's really important that you stay in the lane of what you are already good at. And then the third bit was, and this was hard for me initially, but being able to brush off the failures. I mean, right at the beginning of the pandemic, we tried to convert our one of our major programs on the ground is around menstrual health, and we make retail quality sanitary napkins. And so we tried to take the machine that makes sanitary napkins, and we thought, well, with just a couple small adjustments, I bet we can make masks. And We tried and we tried and we tried. We spent quite a bit of money trying to sort this out, and we failed. We couldn't figure it out. So then we were like, okay, well, how else can we make masks? Well, we've taught 10,000 women to sew. So let's engage those women. So we worked with around 350 women in the safety of their own homes, taught them via videos, like via video, right? Here's the footprint of what you're building. These women made 1 million masks that were
Wow.
then distributed to vulnerable populations all throughout India. And so, and by the way, we paid these 350 women, so they were able to have a stable income in their homes. So again, it was kind of like the example with the conversion of the machine is a good example of where we tried to kind of play outside of our lane, and it failed. And so, but then when we were playing in our lane, how successful a program can be. And so I think that is something that I learned a lot over the last 2 years. During the peak of the pandemic in India, it was brutal, just knowing that no matter what we did, it was never going to be enough. But I think I feel really proud of the work we did on the team on the ground did in India. Sorry, I should give all the credit to the team on the ground in India. They showed me and taught me 3 things. I have never seen more innovative problem solving on the ground with such limited resources in my life. They were having trouble navigating because there were so many, the lockdown was so severe that they were having trouble moving from just one district to another within the same state. And so they would getting stopped by police and all these checkpoints and all that. And even though they had all the right paperwork, right? We had all the right paperwork. So then one of the team members in India said, okay, how can we better help ourselves navigate through these communities? And so they put together these little care packages, and the care packages had masks and sanitary napkins and a couple of these other tchotchkes that our women make, whether it's jewelry or whatever. It had one of our annual reports. It had some of the pamphlets of some of the programs that we administer. She created 200 of these boxes and didn't even tell us that she did this, because this was how she knew how to solve this problem. She distributed them to all of the checkpoint guards. And it wasn't a bribe. There was no money in it. It was really just like, hey, sir, let us show you who we are and what we're doing. And then suddenly we were able to move throughout these communities because the cops were like, oh yeah, hey, we know you. And so that's the type of innovation and problem solving that you really have to trust your team on the ground to run with. Like if we had to ask permission for that program, that thing, if they had to ask us for permission to do that, it would have added so many layers of just bureaucracy to executing that program. So I'll pause there, but
That's great.
Yeah.
That's a powerful pivot as well in terms of, how the Desai Foundation decided to be innovative, and how in this crazy opportunity or this crazy time of, what would seemingly be negative, you created, ways for your team to thrive and for other people in the community to, to earn resources, to earn a living. And so that's super powerful. One of the things that you commented about that really struck me was some of the, other partners that you worked with that, weren't necessarily as swift in terms of figuring out their pivot or figuring out how to thrive during, this time of chaos. And so I'd love for you to talk a little bit about partnerships and the power of partnerships in terms of the work that the Desai Foundation is doing, and in terms of being able to have impact.
Yeah. We watched a lot of our partners on the ground, and also like our funding partners and some of our larger strategic partners, really rise to the occasion, and others that really kind of retreated from the opportunity or the situation. I think I want to take a step back and just recognize, like, when there is a crisis like we've had before, there are so many things to repair, right? So it's not just immediate, like deaths in hospitals from COVID. It's like trust in institutions. It's like trust in media. It's like, relationships between neighbors. There are so many layers, what's happening in schools, of what needs to be repaired. And so when we look at these partners that are all trying to do well and good, the most important thing that's been valuable for us is, do we have a shared vision of the problem that we're trying to solve long term? And then do we have shared values? The short term of like the details of how we get there, that's the fun stuff. That's the stuff that you don't have to be aligned on, because that's the stuff that you're going to be able to work together and build and learn from each other. But as long as the destination is the same, there are a lot of ways to get to the grocery store, right? On the roads. But like, it's not about what's right and what's wrong. It's like, okay, what's the best path for us to get there together? And so that's been something that we've learned a lot through these things. And sometimes that means picking up the phone and calling those partners and saying like, hey, I'm a little disappointed that you laid off your team. I know for a fact that you can afford to keep them on. And them actually having a moment of, holy crap, we didn't realize that that was the signal we were sending to our team. And then watching them hire everybody back. So sometimes your role is, as a partner, just being honest with your colleagues and saying, listen, we think that like, this is how we're handling this. You guys can do whatever you want, but this is how we're handling this. So sharing information. In a moment of crisis, nobody has IP. There is no such thing as IP. In a moment of crisis, everybody, as soon as you make a discovery, you share that information. We put together a hotline which is kind of like a novel concept in India. So it's a phone number where people can call and choose a language, and then they're directed to a person that has like a 65-page dossier of everything you could possibly need to know about COVID, about if you lost a loved one, how to get back to school, how to get resources that you need. And it's all customized by region. And then we've been adapting it language by language. This hotline is operating in states that we aren't even in, because people heard about it and they're like, we want it. And I'm like, here you go. Look, there is no IP around it. There's no, we're not being precious about it. We're just kind of giving it away. So knowing when to hold on to those IPs and knowing when to really let it go. Partnerships for us are exactly how we operate. In fact, the thing that we expect of our partners on the ground, not in an emergency situation, but generally speaking, is you got to meet us 50% of the way. We are never going to come in and do everything. We want you to bring us the leaders. We want you to bring us some local funding. We want you to bring us some top stakeholders. And then that way I can ensure that anything we're doing on the ground is sustainable. If the Desai Foundation were to disappear tomorrow, I can guarantee you that 85% of my programming will continue. Because I know that we've been not just executing programs, but we've been building these organizations locally to grow and thrive. And the people there, we have this great example of this girl that we taught. She took one of our beautician classes. And so she started to locally do weddings here and there. She built a reputation amongst a community. She earned enough money to open her own little salon. And so she has this little salon. And then she came over one day and she says, I'm getting so much business that like I need more staff, like I need to hire people. And she goes, can I train people on my own, or am I going to be taking away your business? And we were like, are you kidding me? Here is our playbook. We handed her our playbook. We said, you go train people. We're psyched for you to go train people. So partnership is really about knowing that your partners are going to come in many forms. They're going to come as some of the people that you serve, and they're going to come as these large institutions. And I think for us, I think as a result of the work we did just now, we are getting invited to some kind of bigger tables than we have in the past, but I have yet to know what those partnerships will really look like. That kind of the future holds. But the one last partnership that I wanted to tell you guys about, which I'm really proud of, is it kind of goes with that values and long-term goal example that I was giving you. At the peak of the pandemic, a very large bank in Switzerland who I have a relationship with, said, listen, what is your number one problem right now? And I said, well, I have all these great programs, but I'm limited by how many people I have to deploy them, because the diaspora, the Indian diaspora, is very quick to pay for things. So they want to pay for books and food and oxygen tanks, but they don't want to pay for the delivery mechanism, or they don't want to pay for the training of somebody delivering COVID information. So we were just in a little bit of like a tricky situation where I had all this stuff that needed to be delivered and not enough people to deliver it. So he said, what if we paid for your staff for 6 months, and not just your staff, but paid for 500 more? So I now have 500 foot soldiers, right? And these are community members. These are people in the villages. So these are people that are getting jobs. So 500 families have jobs. And now they're delivering materials, they're getting trained in a skill, and then they're going to be delivering all these materials, COVID information, delivering food, delivering this, driving people from hospitals, all of that stuff for 6 months. This is a partnership of somebody really understanding the need on the ground. And so, like I said, partnerships come in many forms.
That is super powerful. Megha Desai, Impact Executive, you are absolutely a force. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
Yeah. The thing I want to share is especially with the kind of corporates that are in the room, and kind of the larger institutional nonprofits, there are crises that happen every couple months that we all have to react to, right? Whether it's a natural disaster or a medical disaster or a political disaster. One of the things that I wish that we all as a community did a better job of is not just reacting to the peak of the crisis, but remembering what happens at the tail. And I think that oftentimes we get so wrapped up in connecting our philanthropy or our CSR work with marketing that we sometimes forget about follow through. And that's something that a lot of nonprofits experience, where we get a nice donation from a corporation during a peak of a pandemic, but then when we go back to them and say, hey, we need to continue solving this problem, we aren't able to close the deal. And so just as a plea for all nonprofits across the world, just, we would love for the larger institutions to think about the long tail. Like, we're going to be working on COVID recovery for another 6 months, just from that peak that was in May, not let alone what the rest of what might happen in India and COVID. And then the second bit is, come visit the Desai Foundation. We have events in New York and in Boston. If you visit us at thedesaifoundation.org, you can check out our work and our events, and join us.
Well, I will absolutely join you. And thank you for your time today. You were tremendous. And thanks for all that you do.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the time. And thank you for the Handshake community for inviting me today.
Absolutely.